Okay, I want to read two of my favorite short stories. I've loved these for a long time, and it occurred to me that they really are interesting reverse images of each other, even though they were written 40 years apart. One is by Ernest Hemingway called A Clean, Well-Lighted Place, and I like to think of that story, it's a dark world with a bright spot in it. And the other is one by Ursula Le Guin called The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, and it's about a bright world with a dark spot in the middle of it. So they're both fairly short, but we'll see which one resonates more with you. So I'll start with Hemingway, which was written in 1933. A clean, well-lighted place. It was late, and everyone had left the cafe except an old man who sat in the shadow the leaves of the tree made against the electric light. In the daytime, the street was dusty, but at night the dew settled the dust, and the old man liked to sit late because he was deaf, and now at night it was quiet, and he felt the difference. The two waiters inside the cafe knew the old man was a little drunk, and while he was a good client, they knew that if he became too drunk, he would leave without paying, so they kept watch on him. Last week he tried to commit suicide, one waiter said. Why? He was in despair. What about? Nothing. How do you know it was nothing? Well, he has plenty of money. They sat together at a table that was close against the wall near the door of the cafe and looked at the terrace where the tables were all empty except where the old man sat in the shadow of the leaves of the tree that moved slightly in the wind. A girl and a soldier went by in the street. The streetlight shone on the brass number on his collar. The girl wore no head covering and hurried along beside him. The guards will pick him up, one waiter said. What does it matter if he gets what he's after? Well, he'd better get off the street now. The guards will get him. They went by 5 minutes ago. The old man sitting in the shadow rapped on his saucer with his glass. The younger waiter went over to him. What do you want? The old man looked at him. Another brandy, he said. You'll be drunk, the waiter said. The old man just looked at him. The waiter went away. He'll stay all night, he said to his colleague. I'm sleepy now. I never get to bed before 3 o'clock. He should have killed himself last week. The waiter took the brandy bottle and another saucer from the counter inside the cafe and marched out to the old man's table. He put down the saucer and poured the glass full of brandy. You should have killed yourself last week, he said to the deaf man. The old man motioned with his finger. A little more, he said. The waiter poured onto the glass so that the brandy slopped over and ran down the stem into the top saucer of the pile. Thank you, the old man said. The waiter took the bottle back inside the cafe. He sat down at the table with his colleague again. He's drunk now, he said. He's drunk every night. Why did he want to kill himself for? How should I know? How did he do it? He hung himself with a rope. Well, who cut him down? His niece. Why did they do it? Fear for his soul. How much money has he got? He's got plenty. He must be 80 years old now. Anyway, I should say he was 80. I wish he would go home. I never get to bed before 3 o'clock. What kind of hour is that to go to bed? He stays up because he likes it. He's lonely. I'm not lonely. I have a wife waiting in bed for me. He had a wife once, too. A wife would be no good to him now. You can't tell. He might be better with a wife. His niece looks after him. You said she cut him down. I know. I wouldn't want to be that old. An old man is a nasty thing. Not always. This old man is clean. He drinks without spilling. Even now, drunk. Look at him. I don't want to look at him. I wish he would go home. He has no regard for those who must work. The old man looked from his glass across the square, then over at the waiters. Another brandy, he said, pointing to his glass. The waiter, who was in a hurry, came over. Finished, he said, speaking with that omission of syntax that stupid people employ when talking to drunk people or foreigners. No more tonight. Close now. Another, said the old man. No, finished. The waiter wiped the edge of the table with a towel and shook his head. The old man stood up, slowly counted the saucers, took a leather coin purse from his pocket, and paid for the drinks, leaving half a peseta tip. The waiter watched him go down the street, a very old man walking unsteadily but with dignity. Why didn't you let him stay and drink? The unhurried waiter said. They were putting up the shutters. It's not yet 2:30. I want to go home to bed. What's an hour? More to me than to him. An hour is an hour, the same. You talk like an old man yourself. He can buy a bottle and drink at home. It's not the same. No, it is not, agreed the waiter with the wife. He did not wish to be unjust. He was only in a hurry. And you have no fear of going home before your usual hour? Are you trying to insult me? No, hombre, only to make a joke. No, the waiter, who was in a hurry, said, rising from pulling down the metal shutters, I have confidence. I am all confidence. You have youth, confidence, and a job, the older waiter said. You have everything. And what do you lack? Everything but work. You have everything I have. No, I have never had confidence, and I am no longer young. Come on, stop talking nonsense and lock up. I am of those who like to stay late at the cafe, the older waiter said, with all of those who do not want to go to bed, with all of those who need a light for the night. Well, I want to go home and into bed. We are of two different kinds, the older waiter said. He was now dressed to go home. It is not only a question of youth and confidence, although those things are very beautiful. Each night I am reluctant to close up because there may be someone who needs this cafe. Hombre, there are bodegas open all night long. But you do not understand. This is a clean and pleasant cafe. It is well lighted. The light is very good, and also now there are the shadows of the leaves. Well, good night, said the younger waiter. Good night, the older waiter said. Turning off the electric light, he continued the conversation with himself. It was the light, of course, but it is necessary that the place also be clean and pleasant. You do not want music. Certainly you do not want music. Nor can you stand before a bar with dignity, although that is all that is provided for these hours. What did he fear? It was not a fear or a dread. It was a nothing that he knew all too well. It was all a nothing, and a man was nothing too. It was only that, and light was all it needed, and a certain cleanliness and order. Some lived in it and never felt it. But he knew it was all nada, y puis nada, y nada, y puis nada. Our nada who art in nada, nada be thy name. Thy kingdom nada, thy will be nada in nada as it is in nada. Give us this nada, our daily nada, and nada us our nada as we nada our nadas, and nada us not into nada, but deliver us from nada, puis nada. Hail nothing, full of nothing, nothing is with thee. He smiled and stood before a bar with a shining steam pressure coffee machine. What's yours? Asked the barman. Nada. Oh, you're crazy, said the barman and turned away. A little cup, said the waiter. The barman poured it for him. The light is very bright and pleasant, but the bar is unpolished, the waiter said. The barman looked at him but did not answer. It was too late at night for conversation. You want another cup? The barman asked. No, thank you, said the waiter and went out. He disliked bars and bodegas. A clean, well-lighted cafe was a different thing. Now, without thinking further, he would go home to his room. He would lie in the bed, and finally, when daylight came, he would go to sleep. After all, he said to himself, it must be only insomnia. Many must have it. You know, as long as there's a clean, well-lighted place, you can keep the nothing at bay. Those who hate to go to sleep before daylight. Well, and then the other side of that, so to speak, is a story that was written in 1973 by Ursula Le Guin, who is a writer of speculative fiction. I won't call it science fiction or science fantasy because it's a much broader category than that when she writes it. And it's called The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. With the clamor of bells that set the swallows soaring, the festival of summer came to the city Omelas, bright towered by the sea. The rigging of the boats in the harbor sparkled with flags. In the streets between the houses with red roofs and painted walls, between old moss-grown gardens and under avenues of trees, past great parks and public buildings, processions were moving. Some were decorous, old people in long, stiff robes of mauve and gray, grave master workmen, quiet, merry women carrying their babies and chatting as they walked. In other streets, the music beat faster, a shimmering of gong and tambourine, and the people went dancing. The procession was a dance. Children dodged in and out, their high calls rising like the swallows crossing flights over the music and the singing. All the processions were winding towards the north side of the city, where on the great water meadows called the green fields, boys and girls, naked in the bright air, with mud-stained feet and ankles and long, lithe arms, exercised their restive horses before the race. The horses wore no gear at all, but a halter without bit. Their manes were braided with streamers of silver and gold and green. They flared their nostrils and pranced and boasted to one another. They were vastly excited, the horse being the only animal who has adopted our ceremonies as his own. Far off to the north and west, the mountains stood up, half encircling Omelas on her bay. The air of morning was so clear that the snow still crowning the 18 peaks burned with white gold fire across the miles of sunlit air under the dark blue of the sky. There was just enough wind to make the banners that marked the racecourse snap and flutter now and then. In the silence of the broad green meadows, one could hear the music winding through the city streets, farther and nearer and ever approaching, a cheerful faint sweetness of the air that from time to time trembled and gathered around and broke out into the great joyous clanging of the bells. Joyous. How is one to tell about joy? How describe the citizens of Omelas? They were not simple folk, you see, though they were happy, but we do not say the words of cheer much anymore. All smiles have become archaic. Given a description such as this, one tends to make certain assumptions. Given a description such as this one tends to look next for the king, mounted on a splendid stallion and surrounded by his noble knights, or perhaps in a golden litter borne by great-muscled slaves. But there was no king. They did not use swords or keep slaves. They were not barbarians. I do not know the rules and laws of their society, but I suspect that they were singularly few. As they did without monarchy and slavery, they also got on without the stock exchange, advertisements, the secret police, and the bomb. Yet I repeat, these were not simple folk, not dulcet shepherds, noble savages, bland utopians. They were not less complex than we are. The trouble is that we have a bad habit, encouraged by pedants and sophisticates, of considering happiness as something rather stupid. Only pain is intellectual, only evil interesting. This is the treason of the artist, a refusal to admit the banality of evil and the terrible boredom of pain. If you can't lick 'em, join 'em. If it hurts, repeat it. But to praise despair is to condemn delight. To embrace violence is to lose hold of everything else. We have almost lost hold. We can no longer describe a happy man, nor make any celebration of joy. So how can I tell you about the people of Omelas? They were not naive and happy children, though their children were, in fact, happy. They were mature, intelligent, passionate adults whose lives were not wretched. Oh, miracle! But I wish I could describe it better. I wish I could convince you. Omelas sounds, in my words, like a city in a fairy tale, long ago and far away, a once upon a time. Perhaps it would be best if you imagined it as your own fancy bids you, assuming it will rise to the occasion, for certainly I cannot suit you all. For instance, what about technology? I think that there would be no cars or no helicopters in and above the streets. This follows from the fact that the people of Omelas are happy people. Happiness is based on a just discrimination of what is necessary, what is neither necessary nor destructive, and what is destructive. In the middle category, however, that of the unnecessary but undestructive, that of comfort, luxury, exuberance, and so forth, they could perfectly well have central heating, subway trains, washing machines, and all kinds of marvelous devices not yet invented here, like floating light sources, fuel-less power, a cure for the common cold. Or they could have none of that. It doesn't matter, as you like it. I incline to think that the people from towns up and down the coast have been coming into Omelas during the last days before the summer festival on very fast little trains and double-decked trams, and that the train station of Omelas is actually the handsomest building in town, although plainer than the magnificent farmers market. But even granted trains, I fear that Omelas to some strikes some of you as goody-goody. Smiles, bells, parades, horses, bleh. If so, please add an orgy. If an orgy would help, don't hesitate. Let us not, however, have temples from which issue beautiful nude priests and priestesses, already half in ecstasy and ready to copulate with any man or woman, lover or stranger, who desires union with the deep Godhead of the blood, although that was my first idea. But really, it would be better not to have any temples in Omelas, at least not manned temples. Religion, yes; clergy, no. Surely the beautiful nudes can just wander about, offering themselves like divine soufflés to the hunger of the needy and the rapture of the flesh. Let them join the processions. Let tambourines be struck above the copulations and the glory of desire be proclaimed upon the gongs. And, a not unimportant point, let the offspring of these delightful rituals be beloved and looked after by all. One thing I know there is none of in Omelas is guilt. But what else should there be? I thought at first there were no drugs, but that's puritanical of me. For those who like it, the faint, insistent sweetness of druse may perfume the ways of the city. Druse, which at first brings a great lightness and a brilliance to the mind and limbs, and then, after some hours, a dreamy languor and wonderful visions, at last, of the very arcana and inmost secrets of the universe, as well as exciting the pleasures of sex beyond all belief, and it is not habit-forming. For more modest tastes, I think there ought to be beer. What else belongs in this joyous city? The sense of victory, surely, the celebration of courage. But as we did without clergy, let us also do without soldiers. The joy built upon successful slaughter is not the right kind of joy. It will not do. It is fearful and it is trivial. A boundless and generous contentment, a magnanimous triumph felt not against some outer enemy, but in communion with the finest and fairest in the souls of all men everywhere, and the splendor of the world's summer. That is what swells the hearts of the people of Omelas, and the victory they celebrate is that of life. I don't really think many of them want to take druse. Most of the processions have reached the green fields by now. A marvelous smell of cooking goes forth from the red and the blue tents of the provisioners. The faces of small children are amiably sticky. In the benign gray beard of a man, a couple of crumbs of rich pastry are entangled. The youths and the girls have mounted their horses and are beginning to group around the starting line of the race course. An old woman, small, fat, and laughing, is passing out flowers from a basket, and tall young men wear her flowers in their shining hair. A child of 9 or 10 sits at the edge of the crowd, alone, playing on a wooden flute. People pause to listen, and they smile, but they do not speak to him, for he never ceases playing, and he never sees them, his dark eyes wholly wrapped in the sweet, thin magic of the tune. He finishes and slowly lowers his hands, holding the wooden flute. As if that little private silence were the signal, all at once a trumpet sounds from the pavilion near the starting line, imperious, melancholy, piercing. The horses rear on their slender legs, and some of them neigh in answer. Sober-faced, the young riders stroke the horses' necks and soothe them, whispering, "Quiet, quiet there, my beauty, my hope." They begin to form in rank along the starting line. The crowds gather along the race course are like a field of grass and flowers in the wind. The festival of summer has begun. Do you believe? Do you accept the festival, the city, the joy? No? Then let me describe one more thing. In a basement under one of the beautiful public buildings of Omelas, or perhaps in the cellar of one of its spacious private homes, there is a room. It has one locked door and no window. A little light seeps in dustily between the cracks in the boards, secondhand from a cobweb window somewhere across the cellar. In one corner of the little room, a couple of mops with stiff, clotted, foul-smelling heads stand near a rusty bucket. The floor is dirt, a little damp to the touch, as cellar dirt usually is. The room is about 3 paces long and 2 wide, a mere broom closet or a disused tool room. In the room, a child is sitting. It could be a boy or a girl. It looks about 6, but actually it's nearly 10. It is feeble-minded. Perhaps it was born defective, or perhaps it has become imbecile through fear, malnutrition, and neglect. It picks its nose and occasionally fumbles vaguely with its toes or genitals as it sits hunched in the corner furthest from the bucket and the 2 mops. It is afraid of the mops. It finds them horrible. It shuts its eyes, but it knows the mops are still standing there, and the door is locked, and nobody will come. The door is always locked, and nobody ever comes, except sometimes. The child has no understanding of times or intervals. Sometimes the door rattles terribly and opens, and a person or several persons are there. One of them may come in and kick the child to make it stand up. The others never come in, but peer in at it with frightened, disgusted eyes. The food bowl and the water bowl are hastily filled. The door is locked. The eyes disappear. The people at the door never say anything, but the child, who has not always lived in the tool room and can remember sunlight and its mother's voice, sometimes speaks. "I will be good," it says. "Please let me out. I will be good." They never answer. The child used to scream for help at night and cry a good deal, but now it only makes a kind of whining, "Ee-haw, ee-haw," and it speaks less and less often. It is so thin there are no calves to its legs. Its belly protrudes. It lives on half a bowl of cornmeal and grease a day. It is naked. Its buttocks and thighs are a mass of festered sores as it sits in its own excrement continually. They all know it is there, all the people of Omelas. Some of them have come to see it. Others are content merely to know it is there. They all know that it has to be there. Some of them understand why, and some do not, but they all understand that their happiness, the beauty of their city, the tenderness of their friendships, the health of their children, the wisdom of their scholars, the skill of their makers, even the abundance of their harvest and the kindly weather of their skies, all depend wholly on this child's abominable misery. This is usually explained to children when they are between 8 and 12, whenever they seem capable of understanding. And most of those who come to see the child are young people, though often enough an adult comes or comes back to see the child. No matter how well the matter has been explained to them, these young spectators are always shocked and sickened at the sight. They feel disgust, which they had thought themselves superior to. They feel anger, outrage, impotence, despite all the explanations. They would like to do something for the child, but there is nothing they can do. If the child were brought up into the sunlight out of that vile place, if it were cleaned and fed and comforted, that would be a good thing indeed. But if it were done, in that day and that hour, all the prosperity and beauty and delight of Omelas would wither and be destroyed. Those are the terms. To exchange all the goodness and grace of every life in Omelas for that single small improvement, to throw away the happiness of thousands for the chance of the happiness of one. That would be to let guilt within the walls indeed. The terms are strict and absolute. There may not even be a kind word spoken to the child. Often the young people go home in tears or in a tearless rage when they have seen the child and faced this terrible paradox. They may brood over it for weeks or years, but as time goes on, they begin to realize that even if the child could be released, it would not get much good of its freedom. A little vague pleasure of warmth and food, no doubt, but little more. It is too degraded and imbecile to know any real joy. It has been afraid too long ever to be free of fear. Its habits are too uncouth for it to respond to humane treatment. Indeed, after so long, it would probably be wretched without walls about it to protect it, and darkness for its eyes, and its own excrement to sit in. Their tears at the bitter injustice dry when they begin to perceive the terrible justice of reality and to accept it. Yet it is their tears and anger, the trying of their generosity, and the acceptance of their helplessness, which are perhaps the true source of the splendor of their lives. Theirs is no vapid, irresponsible happiness. They know that they, like the child, are not free. They know compassion. It is the existence of the child and their knowledge of its existence that makes possible the nobility of their architecture, the poignancy of their music, the profundity of their science. It is because of the child that they are so gentle with their children. They know that if the wretched one were not there sniveling in the dark, the other one, the flute player, could make no joyful music as the young riders line up in their beauty for the race in the sunlight of the first morning of summer. Now do you believe in them? Are they not more credible? But there is one more thing to tell, and this is quite incredible. At times, one of the adolescent boys or girls who goes to see the child does not go home to weep or rage, does not, in fact, go home at all. Sometimes also a man or a woman much older falls silent for a day or two and then leaves home. These people go out into the street and walk down the street alone. They keep walking and walk straight out of the city of Omelas, through the beautiful gates. They keep walking across the farmlands of Omelas. Each one goes alone, youth or girl, man or woman. Night falls. The traveler must pass down village streets between the houses with yellow lit windows and on out into the darkness of the fields. Each alone, they go west or north towards the mountains. They go on. They leave Omelas. They walk ahead into the darkness, and they do not come back. The place they go to is a place even less imaginable to most of us than the city of happiness. I cannot describe it at all. It is possible that it does not exist, but they seem to know where they are going, the ones who walk away from Omelas. And that's the other one, the bright world with the dark spot. And there you have it.